you will you will see sticky notes that come up on the slideshow. And at that time, for the session to work at its best, I really would appreciate at least one or two participants can answer these questions, just so we can have some type of group participation. And at this moment, I would like to share my screen so we can get started. Okay, can everyone see these slides? If someone could just put a thumbs up, perfect. Waiting for it to load right now. Okay, so this presentation today is Restorative Justice, Erasing the School to Prison Pipeline, but from a behavioral lens. So I'm a behavioral specialist working at a charter high school, and so I'm directly in the trenches with our youth. And when we speak of words like restorative justice, we hear that term all day long. But for a lot of people, we don't really understand what it means, how to implement it, and what are the structures and systems that's in place that's putting our youth in situations like that anyway, that's causing our school leaders to have to choose between punitive consequences or restorative consequences. So in order to get a cool grasp on how things will work, let's go over some objectives. First, we want to understand and try to get a real idea of what trauma is. And we're going to further expand on ACEs, kind of similar to what Director Lucero spoke about earlier. Then we're going to talk about and identify some common behaviors that may arise because of trauma. Then we're going to talk about some trauma-informed strategies that we could use in our classrooms. And then we're going to talk about the importance of restorative justice. And lastly, we have time. I have a few case studies that we can participate in and try to see if we can establish some solutions. Because in order to effectively implement restorative practices in schools, we have to understand what's causing some of our problems within our youth. So first, can someone tell me whether it's in the, well, I can't see the chat, but if someone could get on the mic and tell me what they think the definition of trauma is? See.
Hey, Scott.
Yes. Yes. I can hear you.
Oh, hold on. I'm trying to think of a best definition without doing my or making it so theory based. But there is a hand raised. Melinda has raised her hand. So can we go to Melinda first for you?
Yes, Melinda.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. I would just say maybe it's like an emotional response to like a terrible event that has happened to you, whether it be, I don't know, abuse from your past, a situation, domestic violence, something like that, but just an emotional response to a traumatic event.
I like that definition. I really do. Trauma is an umbrella term.
Can I ask a question regarding that? Does trauma have to be a negative thing? For example, having children is trauma, trauma in the body. So it's a happiest, joyous thing. So I just wanted to ask that follow-up question on that. Is trauma just like conflict? Is it always?
What I think you're talking about is response to trauma. So if someone's having a baby or something like that, how do they respond to that situation? That's what you're talking about, right?
Yes, yes.
But trauma in itself is an umbrella term used to describe the inability of an individual or community to respond in a healthy way, physically, emotionally, and mentally to acute or chronic stress. So for most of us, when we experience some type of trauma, especially our youth, they don't really know how to handle that situation. And when they come into a classroom with the expectations of school leaders that's very high, they can't get on the same page because for a lot of us, we're not reaching them. And in order to teach them, we have to reach them. Yeah. So just think about some traumas that you may have experienced in the past and how it may have had an impact on your life. Because not only is our youth suffering from a lot of trauma a lot of these times, but us as leaders, school leaders, community leaders, parents, staff, we might be suffering from trauma as well. So it's very essential to get an understanding of what trauma is and how it can impact, okay? So let's talk about some potential causes of trauma post-pandemic, because we had types of trauma before the pandemic, but then the pandemic came and it caused new types of trauma within our youth. Prolonged time without resources, increased time in unstable households, loss of jobs, loss of loved ones, loss of confidence. When our youth has been away from school for 1 or 2 years and they come back, some of them are completely lost. They've just endured a year plus of time where they had to navigate social platforms that they might not have been ready for. They might not have had access to proper computers or internet services or connections. So there's a lot of things that went on that we might not have known about. And when they come back to the classroom, we have to be aware of all of these things. Earlier today, Director Lucero spoke about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. And please excuse me if I'm going fast, but I'm very passionate about this and I have a lot of information and I don't even know if I'm gonna have time to get it all out. I just wanna hit some major points. It's very, very important to understand adverse childhood experiences. And the main 3 types of ACEs include abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. We have students that might come to class, they might be a belligerent, they might come with a demeanor that's not conducive to healthy learning. And for a lot of people, those students may be considered menaces to society. But let's dig deeper. Let's peel the layers of the onion and try to see, instead of looking at the person, let's look at what caused the person to do what that person did. If it if it constituted in a negative behavior or something like that. But types of abuse include physical, emotional, and sexual. Types of neglect include physical and emotional. And then we have household dysfunction, incarcerated relatives, divorce, domestic violence, mental illness, substance abuse, and things of that nature. All of these things not only have a negative impact on our youth in the classroom, but they have a negative impact on our youth in the environment, in the community, at work, when they become adults. At our school that I work at, we used to provide ACE tests for a lot of our students so we can get some type of assessment, okay? And I think it's also essential for adults to take an ACE test, just to see where you stand. And just like Director Lucero spoke about earlier, the higher the ACE score, the greater the risk of having negative emotional health, negative physical health, and things like that. And it has a major effect in the classroom. I had a video right here, but I don't think we have time to play it, but it's a video about adverse childhood experiences and the effects. So I'm gonna skip that for right now. But let's talk about recognizing precipitating factors. You know, a lot of times students come on the campus, the classrooms are not by the door. So for a lot of staff, teachers, or academic coaches or paraeducators, what have you, they're not around the students when they come inside the building. But as a behaviorist, that's where I stand every single day, because I'm checking our students' weather. I'm checking for precipitating factors that might have a negative impact on our students' performance in the classroom. You know, it's been times where our students came into class with no coat on in the rain and came in very upset. They had to go straight to class without being asked if he needed a coat, if he needed to dry off, and then that student was upset. So we have to take into consideration before we give consequences. Are we doing our best as leaders? Are we doing our best as educators to really help and support our students who may be suffering from some type of trauma? Some common precipitating factors from my experience that I've witnessed that it negatively affects youth in the classroom includes hunger, fear, depression, death in the family. Some more, let's see. What about loss of sleep, loneliness, abuse, neglect? All of these things can affect a student's performance in the classroom. And it's very important for someone on campus in that child's life to recognize when these factors occur and try our best to provide the best strategy to reduce the trauma that might come from that. Okay. So we talked about earlier some impacts on learning. When students are suffering from trauma or have high ACE scores, some students have impaired short-term memory, executive functioning deficits. They suffer from fatigue, oppositional behavior, antisocial behavior, difficulty anticipating consequences, difficulty understanding consequences and processing information, difficulty with impulse control and emotional regulation. And for a lot of our students, when they're suffering from trauma and get depressed, that's when we see an increase in absenteeism. Okay. Are there any other impacts on learning that you don't see here that you might have witnessed in your connections with youth? Let me see. I see a question in the chat that said, wait a minute, is trauma the event or the response? That is a great question. Trauma can be the event. And in some cases, it can also be the response. But as a behaviorist, and on any level, I feel like it's my job to recognize trauma in its early stages before responses stem from that trauma, before crisis conflict situations stem from that trauma. And sometimes for our youth, when they suffer from trauma, they might vent, but they don't know how to vent the right way. And so all we see is the energy, the negative energy that comes from that, okay? So at this moment, let's talk about what we can do as leaders. What can we do as educators to provide trauma-informed care? This could be a challenge for most of us, but it always starts with ourselves. We have to check our assumptions, make observations, check our biases, and ask the right questions. It's almost like we have to think on the lens instead of thinking like, what is wrong with you? We have to start thinking like, what happened to you? What is the reason why this behavior happened? What is the reason why you're suffering? What is the reason why you're going through what you're going through, okay? We have to know how people typically respond to stress and escalated situations. And it starts with ourselves. How do we respond to stress? You know, decision-making is very, very big. A lot of times when people are put in situations that's adverse or different from norm, sometimes we have the tendency to overstretch situations and make them bigger than what they really are. And at the same speed, sometimes we see situations that are really big and we don't think that they're that big. It's all about our personal experiences and they all need to be taken in consideration when we support our youth, okay? We have to, don't take it personal. This is very, very important. It's called rational detachment. A lot of our times, our students get in an argument at home on their way to school and they unleash on us. We have to learn not to take things personal. It's very hard. This is very hard. But what this does is when a student has a situation where they feel like they need to vent or unleash on staff verbally, they're watching how we respond to this. They're watching us. They're watching all the techniques and strategies that we use. And we also have to learn that about integrated experience. Our energy is transferable. So when a student, you know, throws that negative energy towards us and we throw it back, we're solving nothing. We have to kind of like not get detached, understand who we are as people, and understand that the energy we give out is going to be reciprocated, and they're watching us. We can't let our emotional brain hijack our thinking brain, okay? I just want to check the chat every now and then so I can see. And we can continue. Proximity, let's make sure I'm right, okay, proximity. This is very important as well. Sometimes we like to get close to our students when we're making the point or when we're trying to give directions, but we want to be very mindful of our spacing. We want to provide personal space as much as possible. And as a behaviorist, I'm a big guy, I have a raspy voice, so sometimes I have to be aware that students may be coming from environments where it's people my size, with my type of voice, but they might be threatening in their household. So for me, when I see students come and who might not be exhibiting the best of behaviors, I want to make sure before I try to give redirections, verbal prompts, or support, I want to make sure my personal stance is cool. I want to make sure I give them an outlet in case they want to leave, in case they don't feel like talking to me at that time, okay? I also want to make sure my positioning in the classroom is safe for everyone. And when I'm having a conversation with students, I want to make sure that they feel on the same level as me. It's always easier to have a sincere conversation with someone if they feel like we're all on the same level. So by me being kind of tall, I have no problem with kneeling down a little bit. It's getting closer to eye-to-eye contact with them, okay? Any questions so far? I really can't see the chat, but if you want to speak real quick and have a quick question, feel free to get on the mic and say something.
People have been making really beautiful comments. No questions though.
Okay, thank you so much. Another important factor about supports, restoratively speaking, is being consistent. For a lot of our youth, you probably can't imagine how many of them are suffering from inconsistent structures in their lives. When we change systems or programs at school, we have to do it in a timely fashion. We also have to give our youth a chance to process and react. We also want to include our students in a lot of the decision-making processes. Because if you want to increase buy-in and increase trust, you have to be inclusive, okay? A lot of our students may push back with expectations, but believe me, they expect them. They expect to be redirected, restoratively though, not punitively. It's a difference. But believe me, students expect to be redirected when done wrong. It's just about the approach, okay? We also want to make sure when routines change, get ahead up. I say as early as possible, try to make sure if any changes need to happen, that our students are well aware of that. And the setting up of our classrooms, the hallways, the community is also very important. When our students come into our space, and I've been on campuses where books are everywhere, desks are turned over, chairs are everywhere. So a student coming into that community might think, oh, this campus doesn't care about us. They don't even want to clean up. Or this campus is not safe. A book can fall on me. I can trip over a desk. So that indirectly, it kind of like damages the integrity of the trust zone that the student might have ordinarily had. So we have to be very, very aware of our environments and being consistent when we do so. Okay. Now, this is important as well. Providing emotional security. As a behaviorist, it's not only my job to make sure there's no fights, to make sure there's no arguments. No, no, no. I want to build people. I want to build self-esteem. I want to empower our youth, okay? And I want to do this intentionally and consistently, okay? You have to do this to build opportunities for students in order for them to be successful. And for a lot of our youngsters, for a lot of our adults, we might not get celebrated a lot. We might feel like we have goals that we haven't attained. So we feel like for a lot of our time, it's been failures. So we have to make sure we're intentional and we celebrate even the smallest of wins. Celebrate every step that a youngster or youth progresses at. At the same time, we want to make affirmations. When you do things like that, you build trust, okay? You build trust through empowerment. You're able to speak truth to power. Instead of just saying, okay, we would like for you to do this. No, don't stop there. Say, we would like for you to do this, because if you do this, these things will happen. Having a consistent pattern of conversations like that will allow for the students to think that we're on their side. Yes, we're redirecting them. Yes, we're giving verbal prompts. That's because we want to see a better version of themselves, not because we want to punish them. So depending on how our students view us, depending on how well we strengthen their emotional intelligence, that's all part of the process to motivate and uplift, okay? Moving right on. Giving back control. What happens when a student comes on campus and, might commit an infraction? For a lot of times, the traditional punitive measures, that student might get a consequence that might include a detention, it might include a suspension, expulsion, whatever. But what happens when our child comes back to school? They're just letting the building and whatever happens, okay? In restorative schools, that's not the case. We give students back to control. We give them ultimatums. We let them make choices. We let them be included in the decision-making process. After a crime or a harm has been committed, and let's say a natural consequence involves a student to be removed from the community for a small amount of time, that's fine. But best believe, when you come back to our campus, we have provided strategies, systems, and supports that would allow you to come back to the community, heal the harm, and restore any relationships, okay? But in that process, we want to make sure that all verbal interactions are calm and simple and with direct language. We try not to leave a lot of space for loopholes, okay? And this is important as well. And some staff might find this hard to do at first, but it's very important for student growth and to earn trust. Allow for venting. As long as it's safe, non-threatening, please allow for students to vent, please. Please allow for adults to vent. You just might be the difference between that student having a great day, great month, great year, or having a bad day, month, or year. Always provide that link, that shoulder, and that listening ear. Okay. I'm gonna check in the chat real quick to see if I see any questions. Oh, I see something. You gonna hear me say it, but I see it in the chat and I have to repeat it. For the students who really know me and for my staff at my campus, I say this a lot. No one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. Just think about that for a moment. If we provided all of our youth with an environment where they knew we cared about them, it will make it so much easier for them to absorb the content that we're delivering, okay? I only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to try to speed up so we can get to the meat and potatoes. Making connections. This is another good component for me. I don't care if I was a janitor, a librarian. I don't care if I was an IT tech. Me being a person I am, me being a person, a survivor of trauma, me being a person who has a few ACE scores, me being a person who's been on both sides of the fences, I am definitely going to make consistent connections, okay? I'm going to try to be their hero. I'm definitely going to try to be a mentor. I want to engage our students. I want to be able to tell stories and allow them to tell stories. I want to be able to provide a culture and environment where our students feel safe, accepted, and valued, okay? I always believe in one band, one sound. Not one man, one sound, one band, one sound. When everyone's playing that melody together, we're all on the same page. You can't hear one person when everyone's playing the same tune. And this tune I'm talking about is empowering our youth. When everyone's doing it, when the system is consistent and everyone's bought in, it's magical. Okay, so let's get into some trauma-informed strategies. We talked about trauma, we talked about trauma-informed care, but what are some direct strategies that we can use in case members of this group work at a school, okay? Well, we talked about recognizing precipitating factors or triggers. We also talked about using phrases of what happened to you instead of what is wrong with you. We also talked about not letting our emotional brain take over our thinking brain. We want to make sure we provide care, welfare, safety, and security. We want to recognize integrated experience. We can't take things personal by recognizing the rational detachment. The trauma iceberg, let me explain that real quick. We all know what an iceberg looks like. Well, we only know what it looks like on the top. And for the most part, the tip of the iceberg is the negative behaviors that we might see from students suffering from trauma. But guess what? The rest of that iceberg that's on the bottom or under the water, that's all the trauma. That's all the precipitating factors that cause the behaviors that we see. So whenever we have a student that's experiencing these levels of trauma, we want to make sure we're providing supportive, empathic, non-judgmental supports. We want to make sure when students are getting off task that we provide directive, clear instructions. And let's say the behavior goes from being verbal to physical. Okay, well, let's make sure we have safety interventions in place that's aligned with the school policy that's non-restrictive or the least restrictive. Let's not punish a kid always by suspending, expelling, or giving them detention. They learn nothing from that. All they learn is, this is what happens when I mess up. I get excluded from the community. And that causes more trauma. But even after a crisis situation may occur, it's very important when a student comes back in the community to provide that therapeutic rapport. You want to make sure you allow for a process of reestablishing relationships, because all behavior is a form of communication. Okay, real quick, we're gonna talk about restorative justice. What does it look like? Well, in a nutshell, restorative justice is community building and the restoration of community. So I'm gonna say it again. It's community building and the restoration of community. And somewhere in between those things, that's when crisis may occur, okay? So it's a two-part process. We wanna build a community to be sustainable, but then if an infraction happens, we wanna make sure we have systems in place to restore the community, okay? So what does RJ look like? Accountability, healing of the harm, restoration, community involvement, community resolution, circles. Oh my God, circles are very important. For a lot of people, they overlook circles. I don't know if it's because of the implementation process. I don't know if it's because of the topics, or I don't know if they think that people won't join the community. But we're gonna talk about circles in a minute, and I'm telling you right now, they're very, very valuable. RJ also looks like when you provide empathy, empowerment, motivation, transformation. And notice that when you look at this list, there's nothing negative about RJ. It's nothing negative, it's nothing punitive. Sometimes we have natural consequences for things, but they're never punitive if it's restorative justice, okay? So what are healthy communities? Healthy communities are inclusive. They are supportive. They are collaborative. One band, one sound, okay? These types of communities are not overnight successes. They're not overnight fixes. They take time. And it's okay because you can't rush progress. So as a behaviorist at my site, I usually provide two types of circles. I provide community circles and restorative circles. A main community circle that I love to use is what I call Teen Summit. And I use Teen Summit to build community amongst our students, to let them know that they might look different, but we're all in the same community when we're in this space. It's a space that allows youngsters to talk about matters or issues that relate to them, matters or issues that they normally can't talk about at home or in the classroom. It also allows for them to earn trust amongst each other, to learn how to respect each other, to learn how to practice active listening, reflective listening, and just how to communicate effectively. But sometimes we have infractions where students have a situation or a crisis. Okay, I'm not gonna stop there. Okay, yeah, y'all had an argument. You might even had a fight. When you come back to the community, we have something in place. We have a reentry meeting. It's a restorative process that allows all parties to be heard. A lot of times we have crisis situations that occur because one party just simply was not heard or that party was misheard. So allowing parties to come to an equitable space where everyone can, tell how they feel, tell how they was feeling at the time, and tell this version of what happened, it allows the other person to listen when they might not have had another chance to do so before. So every time a student is suspended off our campus, if it was a natural consequence, we always allow for restorative reentry meetings, circle style, everyone's on the same level. And so just to give a little help with implementation of circles, it's best to create the circle beforehand. Okay, it's always best to do that. You want to make sure you have a confident facilitator who can confidently lead. And what I always like to use, I want to make sure I establish a talking piece and I set the norms and expectations. What's also a good strategy is invite the community to bring talking pieces. Talking pieces can be something special that means something to you. It could be as random as a book, but that's another section of the circle where you can build community. Just by explaining what the talking piece is and why it's important to you. And from the beginning to the end, all sessions are student focused, okay? So now let's talk a little bit about restoring community. As a behaviorist, like I spoke about before, most people think I'm supposed to spend a lot of my time breaking up fights. Stop, go over there, come back. Why are you leaving campus? No, that's not what I'm supposed to do. If you see me doing that at my job all day long, I'm telling you, I'm not doing my job. As a real behaviorist who cares about the youth and empowering our youth and want to practice restorative justices, 80% of my time is preventing, being proactive. I'm trying to develop a community where we have the least amount of problems as possible. So it's my job to bring the youngsters together, provide spaces where they can collaborate, you know? I spend the least of my time being reactive, okay? That's during the intervention stage. If I'm doing my job effectively, I'm trying to have as least amount of fights as possible. So therefore, I'm spending the least amount of my time doing that. The majority of my time, I'm trying to build community. If I have to restore community, that's fine. But my job is to make sure that when students come up to the campus and staff, that they feel safe, they feel welcome, and they feel valued, okay? So I think we only have a few minutes left, but real quick, the social discipline window. If you look at the shaded gray area where it says with, that's where we are. Punitive to the left of it, that means I'm gonna do something to you, okay? If I was a neglectful staff, I'm not doing anything at all. If I'm permissive, I'm doing everything for you. But as a restorative staff, as a restorative school, as a restorative community, we do things with you, okay? So that's that slide right there. And before we go, I just want to everyone to look at this graphic real quick. It has a few stats, and it kind of touches on what Director Lucero talked about earlier. From the school to prison pipeline, okay? If we look at the left, 40% of students expelled from US schools each year are Black. 70% of students involved in in-school arrests are referred to law enforcement are Black or Latino. 3.5 was Black students are 3.5 times more likely to be suspended than whites. Black and Latino students are twice as likely to not graduate high school as whites. And 68% of all males in staff and federal prison do not have a high school diploma. So you can see just off these stats alone, it's a clear path for a lot of our youth who don't get proper support to go from school to prison. But if we look to the right, we also have a population of students that's in foster care. And it seems like that's a pot for a lot of our prisons. Let's look at the stats. 50% of students in foster care systems are Black and Latino. 30% of foster care youth entering the juvenile system systems are placement-related behavioral cases. 25% of young people leaving foster care will be incarcerated within a few years after turning 18. Wow. 50% of young people leaving foster care will be unemployed within a few years after turning 18. And 70% of inmates in California state prison are former foster care youth. So for a lot of our youngsters, they don't see any hope. They don't see any answers. When they make mistakes or make infractions, they get ostracized. And what happens? They make bad decisions. And then what happens? They end up in prison or worse. So it's very important for me and colleagues like myself to make sure we're doing everything we can to reduce the school to prison pipeline. And in order to do that effectively, we have to recognize the systems, the precipitating factors, the structures that are in place that causes our students to get in that position anyway. Okay. And I don't know, how much time do we have left? Let me see.
We have 1 minute
1
left.
minute.
Okay, so we don't really have time for our case studies, but let me just do one real quick. You are teaching a class, and it is about 10 minutes before class is over with. As you begin to issue the homework assignment, you notice Timothy abruptly gets up and leaves the classroom. You have the AC, the academic coach, cover the class to go look for him. You eventually find him behind the stairwell crying profusely. Knowing Timothy is visibly shook, you gently bend over and remind him, you know you didn't finish your homework assignment, and I have to call home for you leaving class. As you walked away, he cried even louder. So let's real quick. What are some trauma-informed strategies that we could have used to support him moving forward? Could someone get on the mic?
I think the first step would have been asking him, was he okay?
Yeah, why was he crying to begin?
What's going on with you? What's happening?
Right. I think the last thing I might have said was, you know, you didn't do your homework assignment. I mean, at that moment.
To be
that's
focusing
true.
on him and not the homework.
Right, exactly. But these are things that happen every day in classrooms, and the responses can shape. That's what I'm saying. Someone asked, what is trauma, the response or the event? Well, for this young man, I mean, I would have to answer that question, because after this teacher left, he started crying again. So he was already traumatized. And then he got support, the wrong kind of support. And because of that kind of support, it triggered him and caused him to cry again. So I have a few more case studies, but we really don't have time. I just want to say thank you, everyone. I really appreciate everyone for joining this session.
Right? Like if we're
Yeah.
not talking to the youth shooting each other,
Yes.
we're never going to stop them from shooting each other. Like no matter what your lived experiences are, no matter what titles you hold, if you're not going directly to them to figure out what needs to be done, you failed and you'll continue to fail.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. I
Yes,
know
ma'am.
we have to wrap up. Thank you so much.
No, thank you.
Nice job.
Yeah, so on behalf of the Kayak Youth Summit, we'd like to thank Scott James and Dr. Mendez for their presentations on restorative justice and real youth voices for change. We really appreciate you for teaching us. To demonstrate our appreciation, we hope to send you off again with a virtual applause. So if everyone could please do that little emoji again. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you for everyone to participating in the last workshop that we had. We're going to do one more set of workshops for today, and then we'll be moving on to some youth opportunities a little bit after it. So please give a warm welcome to the next two speakers that we have up today. So please give a warm welcome to Joe Brumer. Brumer specializes in nonviolent communications and trauma-informed practices. And now Joe Brumer has been kind enough to give us a presentation on trauma-informed restorative systems. We'd also like to kindly welcome Nicole Posada, sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that, but Nicole's path to public service and organizing social change began in early childhood. Growing up in Flint, Michigan, she volunteered alongside family members lobbying for the rights of local auto workers. The shared experience instilled a servant leadership model fundamental in career and life choices. Nicole, working with California's Department of Industrial Relations and the Division of Apprentices Standard as a strategic business advisor. Her mission is to develop a skilled workforce with a viable career pathway to increase productivity and strengthen California's economy. Nicole holds a